Hello and welcome to Mindful Biology. This is our fourth talk out of 5 about mortality. In the first session, we looked at the presence or perhaps the omnipresence of death in our lives, how whether consciously or unconsciously it colors and flavors our experience. In the second talk, we looked at the biology of death and some of the functions that it serves. In the third, we looked at what happens after we die, and today we'll look at what happens during the actual dying process. So at some point, each of us will undergo the transition from being a living, breathing human to being, or at least leaving behind, a corpse. We know, of course, of several possibilities for how we might end up in the condition of being dead. It could follow a long illness. It could happen after a sudden accident, and there are many, many other possibilities. Until recently, this was about all we could say with certainty about the transition from life to death. That there were various ways that it could be triggered, and that there was a certainty that a body would be left behind in some form. Of course, religions give us the impression of providing more information, but we have to believe that those claims by the religions are valid in order for them to influence our own beliefs. And obviously there's a lot of controversy there. And some people experience visitations or they attend seances, and they may also get the idea that they have more understanding about what happens after we die. But again, those tend to be fairly controversial, not the kinds of reports that we can rely upon objectively. So until recently, there was a kind of complete blockage to information about what happens after we pass through death's door. But that seems to have changed in recent years because of advances in modern medicine that now allow people to be brought back after states of clinical death, which is to say after the heart has stopped beating and the brain has ceased functioning in any measurable way. People have been brought back after minutes and occasionally even hours of clinical death. And some substantial minority of them report what is called a near-death experience. There are other names for it, but that's the most common. Most of us, I think, have heard about these and perhaps read about them, but if you haven't and want to learn more, the book on your screen is a good one to start with. I think it provides a fairly balanced treatment of the information currently available. So to recap, at this time in history, we now have information that extends from the causes, the immediate causes of death, through the fact of a dead body and what happens to it, to a little bit of information about what happens to consciousness at the time of clinical death. We have information up to this point. After that, there's a kind of barrier, a blockage to what we can know. No one has returned in a way that everyone, will agree about from a fully completed state of death, that is to say days, weeks, and years after having died. Again, there are ideas about this, there are religious and other reports, but not anything that could be called systematic and objective knowledge, the way there is about near-death experiences, which have been reported so many times that they can no longer, be doubted. So beyond that early transition period, we have to rely on religious notions about perhaps a heaven or reincarnation or the dissolution of individual consciousness into a vast cosmic consciousness, or as is believed by many mainstream scientists, the very real possibility in their opinion that consciousness just ends when the brain ceases functioning. Now, I want to talk just a little about that. It's an opinion held by many scientists, including many and perhaps most brain scientists, but it can't be looked at as a scientific fact or even a particularly scientifically validated proposal. It's based on the assumption that has yet to be proven that consciousness is purely a function of brain activity and has no other source or origin. And because that assumption has yet to be validated scientifically, the conclusion that when the brain stops functioning, consciousness must also stop, can only be looked at as a conjecture. And that's not to say that it's wrong, but it certainly can't be claimed as a proven fact. And I just kind of want to highlight that because it is such a dominant belief at the present time. So a more scientifically balanced view would be that people, at least for a short period of time after clinical death, can report these unusual and often very powerful and transformative experiences. That's a fairly objective statement about what people are reporting, in a systematic, common, and repeatable fashion. So let's look at that near-death experience just a little bit more. Most of us, I think, are familiar with it, but it's, kind of nice, I think, to sort of preview what we might experience in the early stages of the transition through death's door. So, each of us at some point, because of old age or some other reason, will have a body that ceases functioning and will die. Now, people that have been brought back from that state of clinical death have reported quite frequently a passage down a corridor or a tunnel toward a bright light. Another commonly reported feature of the near-death experience is being greeted by loved ones in this realm beyond life. Another fairly commonly reported experience is one of reviewing one's entire life from beginning to end, and particularly with attention to times when we have done harm to others, with a kind of awareness and empathic understanding of exactly how that harm felt to the other person. And this is usually a kind of, loving and compassionate review, one that isn't about punishment and blame, but more about awareness and learning and connecting. Another frequent feature is the encounter with a luminous being of some sort who might be present during the life review. This could be a religious figure, particularly for those people who have that belief prior to going through the state of clinical death. It could be a wise elder. It could just be a kind of vague, warm presence. Another feature that is encountered sooner or later is the sense that one is being told, we cannot go further here. You cannot go further. You must turn and return and re-enter the body. So those are fairly commonly reported features. Not everyone reports all of them, but they occur commonly enough, again, that they need to be taken seriously as valid subjective phenomena that have occurred to many people many times. I should point out that these experiences don't depend on pre-existing beliefs. I mean, they're shaped and colored by the pre-existing beliefs in the sense that a luminous being is likely to be interpreted as Christ by a Christian. But even atheists, people with absolutely no belief in an afterlife, have had these experiences and come back. And usually they tend to change their opinions a bit after they've gone through something like this, although not always. So the historical situation where we had no knowledge that we could agree upon about what happens after death has now altered a little bit, that the barrier that blocks us from knowing has been moved back a little bit behind the door. Of course, that still leaves a lot of mystery about what really will become of us after our consciousness is no longer supported by a living brain. Will it just cease the way the mainstream scientists believe? Will it go to a heaven the way some religions believe, or perhaps be reincarnated as believed by others, and so on? There are all these possibilities, but the dominant feature is one of mystery, of not knowing what the final fate of consciousness will be. Now, we could scramble to try to lock in on a particular belief system, either conforming with our religion, or with the dominant belief of our culture, or our own philosophical preferences, etc. We could decide for ourselves, this is what I believe will happen, or we could actually open to the mystery, the not knowing. And in that case, if we allow that we're not entirely sure what death will bring, then we can turn to poetry and art to provide a sense of wonder, perhaps, about our lives and our deaths.